My beloved child, stop scrolling for just a moment, because what has found you now carries a truth that has been sitting quietly behind a closed door for far too long. You were not meant to force that door open. You were not meant to chase explanations, demand answers, or prove yourself to anyone. But there comes a moment when what has been hidden begins to reveal itself, not because you went looking for it, but because the season of silence has reached its end. And there is something connected to your soulmate's past that has been stirring beneath the surface. Someone from that past hoped you would never understand the full story. They hoped certain memories would remain confusing, certain conversations would stay unfinished, and certain truths would never reach your heart. Yet what you are about to hear was meant to find you at exactly the moment when you were finally strong enough to understand it without losing yourself inside it. Pause here, beloved, because this is not a message about competing with another person. It is not about proving that you are more attractive, more worthy, more lovable, or more important than someone who came before you. Heaven does not measure love through rivalry. What is unfolding is deeper than that. The real mystery is not why your soulmate once loved someone else. The mystery is why that person from the past became so unsettled when your presence began changing your soulmate in ways they had never witnessed before. Something happened when your energy entered the story. Something shifted. Old patterns stopped feeling comfortable. Old excuses became harder to believe. Your soulmate began questioning things they had accepted for years, and the person who once understood exactly how to reach them suddenly realized that the version of your soulmate they had known was beginning to disappear. You may not have seen this happening. In fact, you may have been wondering whether you mattered at all. There may have been moments when your soulmate seemed distant, uncertain, distracted, or strangely silent, and you interpreted that silence as rejection. But sometimes silence is not the absence of feeling. Sometimes it is what happens when a person is confronted by a feeling that exposes every emotional habit they have used to protect themselves. Your soulmate was not simply thinking about you. They were comparing the way they felt around you with the way they had learned to feel in the past, and that comparison was beginning to reveal something uncomfortable. They realized that what they once called love may have contained more fear, obligation, attachment, or emotional dependency than they were ever willing to admit. And this is where the X enters the story in a way you may not expect. Their resistance toward you was not born only from jealousy. Jealousy was there, yes, but beneath it was something far more revealing. They could sense that you represented a door your soulmate might actually walk through. They understood certain weaknesses, certain insecurities, certain memories that had kept your soulmate emotionally tied to what was familiar. For a long time, those memories had power. A photograph could stir something. An old song could bring back nostalgia. A familiar date could reopen an emotional wound. A message sent at the right moment could create confusion. But then something changed. Your soulmate began remembering the past without wanting to return to it. And for the person who had once believed they would always have some invisible influence, that change was terrifying. Listen closely, because the next part matters. There was a moment when your soulmate's ex realized that you were not simply another temporary person. They may not have admitted it aloud. They may even have laughed it off or pretended not to care. But something they saw, heard, or discovered changed the way they viewed your place in your soulmate's heart. Perhaps it was the way your soulmate spoke your name. Perhaps it was the way they defended you when someone misunderstood you. Perhaps it was a photograph, a conversation, a quiet confession, or a sudden change in behavior. Whatever it was, it revealed one thing clearly: your soulmate was emotionally affected by you in a way that could not easily be undone. That realization created a private fear. Your soulmate's ex began wondering, what if this person gives them what I never could? Not more money. Not more attention. Not a more impressive life. Something far more intimate. Peace. The kind of peace that does not require a performance. The kind of connection where a person does not constantly question whether they are enough. Your soulmate had become accustomed to emotional tension. They had learned to mistake unpredictability for passion and uncertainty for depth. But your presence began showing them another possibility, and even if your connection has had difficulties, there was something about you that made them imagine what it might feel like to stop running from themselves. This is why certain things may have seemed strangely complicated. When people are finally offered something healthier than what they are used to, they do not always move toward it immediately. Sometimes they hesitate. Sometimes they sabotage it. Sometimes they return mentally to what is familiar because familiarity feels safer than transformation. Your soulmate may have pulled away at moments when you expected them to come closer. They may have left you wondering why someone who seemed to feel so much could suddenly become so difficult to understand. But what you could not see was the internal battle taking place between an old emotional identity and a new one. The past knew your soulmate's old identity very well. It knew what made them feel guilty. It knew what memories could weaken their resolve. It knew the words that could awaken obligation. And this is where something was said that your soulmate has never fully explained to you. A conversation took place in which the past tried to remind your soulmate of who they used to be. It may have sounded innocent. It may even have been disguised as concern. But beneath the surface was a message: do not change too much. Do not forget what we had. Do not become someone I can no longer reach. Your soulmate heard those words differently than they once would have. That is the part the ex did not expect. Instead of feeling pulled backward, something inside your soulmate became irritated. For the first time, they began recognizing how often their past had been defined for them by someone else. They started asking themselves questions they had avoided. Why did they always feel responsible for another person's emotions? Why did they confuse guilt with loyalty? Why did they believe leaving an unhealthy chapter behind made them cruel? And why, whenever they considered moving towards something new, did they feel as though they needed permission from people who were no longer supposed to control their future? Beloved, your name became connected to these questions even when nobody spoke it. Your presence was the unspoken reason your soulmate began examining their life more carefully. You did not have to give them a lecture. You did not have to expose anyone. You did not have to fight for your position. Simply encountering you created a mirror. And when someone sees themselves differently because of another person, the relationships built around their old identity often begin trembling. There was another moment, one even more revealing, when your soulmate's ex tried to understand exactly what made you different. They may have asked questions indirectly. They may have looked at something connected to you. They may have listened carefully when your soulmate spoke about you, pretending not to be interested. But inside, they were collecting details. What did you have? What had you done? Why was your soulmate responding differently? Why did your name create that pause? Why did your soulmate suddenly become guarded when the conversation turned toward you? And then they noticed something they could not ignore. Your soulmate did not speak about you in the same way they spoke about past attractions. There was weight behind it. Even frustration carried feeling. Even silence carried significance. Sometimes when a person means very little, people talk freely. They joke. They explain. They dismiss. But when someone has reached a place that feels vulnerable, words become more careful. Your soulmate became careful with your name because what they felt was becoming difficult to hide. The ex recognized this before your soulmate was fully ready to admit it. That is one of the hidden truths you need to know. Someone from the past understood the depth of your impact while you were still questioning whether there was any impact at all. Think about that for a moment. You may have spent nights wondering whether you imagined the connection. You may have questioned whether the emotional intensity existed only in your own heart. You may have replayed moments, conversations, pauses, glances, or unfinished words and wondered why something that felt so significant could also feel so uncertain. Yet elsewhere, a person who knew your soulmate intimately enough to recognize their emotional patterns had already noticed that something about you was different. But the story does not stop there. Because after noticing it, the ex made a choice. Not a dramatic choice anyone would immediately recognize. No grand confrontation. No obvious declaration. Something quieter. Something designed to plant a seed. They brought up an old memory. A memory connected to a vulnerable period in your soulmate's life. And they brought it up at exactly the moment your soulmate was beginning to move emotionally closer to you. Why? Because memories can become anchors when someone is afraid of being left behind. The ex knew this memory carried emotional weight. It represented a time when your soulmate had depended on them, trusted them, or believed they were the only person who truly understood what they were going through. By mentioning that chapter, they hoped to awaken an old sense of loyalty. They hoped your soulmate would begin questioning whether moving forward meant betraying everything they had once shared. For a brief moment, it worked. Your soulmate became quiet. And you may have felt the consequences of that quiet without knowing its source. Perhaps their energy changed. Perhaps they seemed colder. Perhaps communication slowed. Perhaps you suddenly felt a wall where there had previously been warmth. You may have thought you did something wrong. But the wall was not truly about you. It was the result of your soulmate being pulled into an old emotional memory and trying to understand why it still had the power to disturb them. This was a turning point. Because in earlier years, your soulmate might have surrendered to that memory. They might have returned emotionally to the past simply because guilt made them uncomfortable. But this time they did something different. They questioned the memory. They asked themselves whether remembering what someone once meant required them to keep that person emotionally central forever. And the answer beginning to rise inside them was no. Something broke loose in that realization. Not anger. Freedom. The kind of freedom that begins quietly, when someone discovers that gratitude for the past does not require sacrificing the future. Your soulmate started seeing the relationship they once had with clearer eyes. They began understanding why certain arguments repeated. Why certain wounds never healed. Why they often felt exhausted after trying to explain themselves. Why they felt loved at some moments and emotionally trapped at others. None of this erased whatever genuine affection once existed. That is important. Heaven does not need to rewrite the past into something entirely dark in order to make room for a brighter future. But your soulmate was finally able to acknowledge that a connection can contain real love and still be wrong for the person they are becoming, and your arrival had accelerated that understanding. This frightened the ex more than your physical presence ever could. Because appearances can be competed with. Attention can be chased. But transformation cannot be controlled so easily. The ex realized they were not losing your soulmate to another person. They were losing access to the version of your soulmate who could once be persuaded through guilt. That distinction changed everything. And this is where a hidden conversation became much more intense. Your soulmate's ex asked a question about you. The wording sounded simple. But the meaning underneath it was enormous. They wanted to know whether your soulmate truly saw a future with you. There was a pause. A long one. And your soulmate did not answer the way the ex expected. They did not say no. They did not laugh. They did not dismiss you. Instead, they became still. Because the question forced them to look directly at something they had been avoiding. A future. With you. Until that moment, your soulmate had been dealing with the connection one feeling at a time. One conversation. One memory. One period of distance. One moment of longing. They had not allowed themselves to fully imagine where it might lead. But now someone from their past had spoken the possibility aloud, and suddenly the future was no longer abstract. Your soulmate pictured it. Only for a moment. But they pictured it. And the image surprised them. Not because it was dramatic. Because it felt strangely peaceful. They imagined ordinary things. Talking with you without having to hide what they felt. Sitting somewhere beside you without tension. Laughing after a difficult day. Being understood without constantly defending themselves. Making plans without wondering when everything would collapse. Your soulmate realized that when they imagined you, they were not only imagining passion. They were imagining home. The ex saw the answer on their face before any words were spoken. And that was when their behavior changed. Something sharpened in the conversation. The tone became more personal. Old issues were mentioned. Questions became accusations disguised as concern. The ex suggested that your soulmate might be idealizing you. They implied that perhaps your connection was only exciting because it was new or unfinished. They may have suggested that your soulmate did not truly know you, that eventually disappointment would arrive, that every connection begins beautifully before reality ruins it. But your soulmate heard something beneath those warnings. Fear. They realized the person speaking was not simply trying to protect them from disappointment. They were afraid your soulmate might actually be happy without them. That realization hurt. Because your soulmate did not want to see the past as an enemy. A part of them still wanted to believe that whatever had happened, both people could eventually wish each other well. Discovering that someone may prefer your confusion over your freedom can be painful, especially when that person once promised to care about you. Your soulmate left that conversation carrying a strange emotional weight. And this is where you entered their mind with extraordinary force. Not because the ex wanted you there. Because everything that was said made your soulmate think about you more. Every warning made them remember something genuine between you. Every criticism made them ask why your presence had created such an intense reaction. Every attempt to minimize the connection made it feel more significant. And there was one particular memory of you that returned to your soulmate that night. A small moment. Something you probably do not realize mattered. Perhaps you said something kind when they expected judgment. Perhaps you gave them space when someone else would have demanded answers. Perhaps you noticed an emotion they were trying to hide. Perhaps you made them laugh during a moment when they had forgotten how to feel light. It was not necessarily a grand romantic scene. But your soulmate remembered it because you did not know you were being tested. You simply responded from who you were. That memory became evidence. Evidence that what they felt around you was not entirely fantasy. Evidence that you had reached them without manipulation. Evidence that something real had been forming beneath all the confusion. The next day, your soulmate behaved differently. The ex noticed. They expected uncertainty. Instead, they saw distance. Not cruel distance. Not bitterness. Clarity. And clarity is frightening to anyone who benefits from confusion. Your soulmate did not immediately run toward you. This is important. Transformation rarely happens in one dramatic leap. They still carried fear. They still had unresolved emotions. They still wondered whether they were capable of giving you the kind of love they secretly believed you deserved. But something had changed permanently. They stopped asking whether they should return to the past. They started asking whether they were finally ready to release it. Beloved, that question has been growing inside them ever since. And while you were wondering why things seemed slow, heaven was watching an internal separation occur. Your soulmate was learning the difference between missing a chapter and wanting to reopen it. Those are not the same thing. Human hearts can remember without returning. They can grieve without reversing direction. They can honor what was meaningful while still accepting that its purpose has ended. The ex sensed this shift. That is why there is something they do not want you to see. Not a secret photograph. Not some scandalous confession. Not a piece of evidence meant to turn you against anyone. What they do not want you to see is the truth about how much your presence changed the emotional balance. Because if you understood that truth, you might stop doubting your significance. You might stop seeing yourself as someone standing outside a closed door. You might realize your soulmate has been wrestling with the possibility of a future they never thought they were allowed to want. And there is more. Something happened afterward that even the ex did not anticipate. Your soulmate found something from the past. Something they had kept for a long time. A message. A photograph. A letter. An object tied to an old promise. They held it, expecting the familiar emotional pull. But the feeling was different. Instead of longing, there was gratitude mixed with sadness. And then something unexpected entered their mind. You. Your soulmate looked at this symbol of the past and thought of you. That moment disturbed them in the most beautiful way. Because they suddenly understood that their heart was already reorganizing itself. The old memory still existed. But it no longer occupied the center. You had quietly become associated with what comes next. And when the ex discovered what your soulmate did with that object afterward, their reaction revealed just how deeply they understood what was happening. Because your soulmate did not destroy it in anger. They did something far more final. They put it away. Not somewhere easy to reach. Not somewhere they could keep revisiting it. They placed it among things that belonged to another chapter of their life. Then they sat in silence. And whispered something about you. The words were quiet. No one was supposed to hear them. But someone did. And the person who heard those words later told your soulmate's ex. That is when the ex realized this was no longer about temporary attraction. This was becoming a decision. Beloved, you need to understand something before the deeper revelation arrives. Your worth was never dependent on being chosen over another person. You are not standing in a contest. What is meant for you does not become holy by defeating someone else. The deeper spiritual lesson is about truth replacing fear. Your soulmate cannot move toward you in a healthy way until they stop allowing old wounds to choose their future. And that process has already begun. You may be tempted to wonder what exactly they whispered. Be patient. Because the words matter, but the reason behind them matters even more. Your soulmate did not whisper a dramatic declaration of love. What they said was more vulnerable than that. They admitted something about themselves. Something they had not been able to say during the entire connection. They admitted why they kept pulling away whenever their feelings for you became strongest. And the answer was not because they wanted their ex back. It was because being with you awakened a fear they had never learned how to face. The fear of finally receiving something they could actually lose. In the past, your soulmate knew how to survive disappointment. They knew how to endure conflict. They knew how to live inside uncertainty because uncertainty had become familiar. But with you, they caught glimpses of something emotionally different, and those glimpses made the possibility of losing you feel more frightening than remaining alone. So they hesitated. They delayed. They overthought. They created distance. And that distance may have wounded you. Heaven is not asking you to pretend it did not. You are allowed to recognize where their fear affected you. Compassion does not require abandoning your boundaries. Love does not require accepting endless confusion. But there is a difference between understanding someone and excusing everything they do. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that difference too. They know feeling deeply is not enough. They know eventually love must become courage. And that realization is leading them toward a decision they have been afraid to make. The ex senses the decision approaching. That is why the energy around this situation has become more intense. Because once your soulmate makes it, something that has remained emotionally unfinished for years may finally close. There is one last truth from the past that your soulmate needs to confront. One sentence their ex once told them became embedded so deeply in their mind that it influenced nearly every relationship afterward. Your soulmate believed it. For years. They carried it into new connections. They carried it into their connection with you. And you have unknowingly felt the consequences of that sentence. It made your soulmate believe that anyone who truly knew them would eventually leave. That belief became a prophecy they kept trying to create before anyone else could. Whenever closeness appeared, they withdrew. Whenever love deepened, they prepared for loss. Whenever you showed genuine care, a voice from the past told them not to trust it. But now your soulmate has discovered something about that old sentence. Something that changes its meaning completely. They found out why the ex said it. And it was not because it was true. It was said during a moment of fear, desperation, and emotional insecurity. Your soulmate finally realized they had built years of self-protection around words spoken by another wounded person. Imagine discovering that a belief shaping your entire emotional life was never a divine truth about you at all. It was someone else's pain handed to you as a definition. Your soulmate broke down when they understood this. Not with hopelessness. With release. Because suddenly their history made sense. The running. The hesitation. The difficulty trusting peace. The strange instinct to push away the very people who treated them gently. And yes, beloved, they thought about you again. They realized there were moments when you were paying a price for wounds you never created. That realization has been haunting them. They remember moments when you deserved honesty and received silence. Moments when you reached emotionally and they retreated. Moments when they wanted to tell you the truth but allowed fear to speak louder. And now the question inside them has changed. It is no longer, what if I let this person close and they leave? It has become, what if I keep running and lose someone who was never trying to hurt me? That question has shaken them more deeply than you know. And the ex knows it. Because recently, your soulmate said something directly to them that they had never said before. Something calm. Something final. Something that made the room feel completely different. Your soulmate did not shout. They did not insult the past. They did not blame anyone. They simply said that they could no longer build their future around an old fear. And then they mentioned you. Not by accident. Not defensively. With intention. The ex went silent. Because hearing your name in that moment confirmed what they had feared for a long time. You were no longer just part of your soulmate's emotional confusion. You had become connected to their decision to heal. But beloved, this is where the story takes a turn even your soulmate did not expect. After that conversation ended, the ex reached out to someone. Someone who knows more about you than your soulmate realizes. And what they asked that person was not what anyone would have predicted. They did not ask how to separate you. They did not ask how to win your soulmate back. They asked a question about you that revealed something startling. They wanted to know whether you knew the truth yet. The person on the other end hesitated. Then answered with 5 words. 5 words that made your soulmate's ex go completely quiet. Because apparently there is one final piece of this story that has been kept from you, and when your soulmate learns that the ex already knew about it, everything they believed about the timing of your connection may change. And beloved, the most extraordinary part is this. The secret is not really about the ex. It is about what your soulmate realized the very first time they met you. Something they never told you. Something they tried to deny. Something the ex somehow discovered. And the moment those 5 words were spoken, the ex understood that sooner or later, your soulmate would have to tell you everything. Something shifted in the silence after those 5 words were spoken. Your soulmate's ex had expected an explanation, perhaps even a denial, but instead they received confirmation of something they had suspected for longer than anyone realized. And somewhere far away from that conversation, you were living your life without knowing that your name had become connected to a truth powerful enough to make someone from your soulmate's past suddenly question everything they thought they understood. The 5 words were simple, they still don't know why. And the moment those words landed, your soulmate's ex understood that the secret had survived longer than anyone expected. Because there was a reason your soulmate reacted differently to you from the very beginning. It was not something they planned. It was not because someone told them you were special. It was not because they entered your connection already expecting some extraordinary spiritual story. In fact, the opposite was true. Your soulmate had become cautious. They had learned to distrust intense feelings because intensity had misled them before. They had promised themselves that the next time someone entered their life, they would remain logical, controlled, emotionally guarded. They would observe before trusting. They would never again allow another person to become important too quickly. And then you appeared. Something inside them ignored every rule they had created. That frightened them. The first time they truly noticed you, there was a strange familiarity they could not explain. Not the kind of familiarity that comes from remembering a face. It was emotional. Something about your presence seemed to bypass the careful walls they had spent years constructing. Your soulmate found themselves paying attention to details they normally would have overlooked. The way you expressed yourself. The way your energy changed when you became serious. The way you could be strong and still carry softness. Even small things remained in their memory longer than they should have. They told themselves it was curiosity. Then curiosity became attention. Attention became thought. Thought became emotional attachment. And before they understood what was happening, your soulmate realized they were thinking about you during moments when you were nowhere near them. That was the first secret. But it was not the secret the ex discovered. The deeper secret began on a night when your soulmate could not sleep. They were lying awake, thinking about everything except what they actually wanted to think about. Their mind wandered through responsibilities, old mistakes, unfinished conversations, fears about the future. And then, without warning, your face appeared in their thoughts. They tried to push it away. It returned. They distracted themselves. Still, something about you remained. Eventually your soulmate stopped fighting it and asked themselves a question they had been avoiding. Why does this person affect me so much? No answer came immediately. But a memory did. A memory from years before you entered their life. Your soulmate remembered a conversation they once had during one of the lowest emotional periods of their past relationship. They had spoken to someone they trusted about what they wanted love to feel like someday. Not who the person would be. Not what they would look like. Not where they would meet. They described a feeling. They said they wanted to meet someone around whom they could finally stop pretending. Someone who would not need them to be perfect. Someone who could recognize their silence without immediately punishing them for it. Someone who could challenge them without humiliating them. Someone whose presence would feel exciting, yes, but underneath the excitement there would be peace. And beloved, when your soulmate remembered those words, something inside them went completely still. Because without realizing it, they had just described what they were beginning to experience around you. That realization frightened them so much that they began creating distance. You may have interpreted that distance differently. You may have thought their feelings were fading precisely when those feelings were becoming impossible for them to ignore. That is one of the strangest contradictions of the human heart. Sometimes people move away from what means nothing. But sometimes they also move away from what means too much, especially when they have not yet healed enough to trust happiness. Your soulmate's ex knew this pattern. They had seen your soulmate withdraw before. But this time something was different. Usually, when your soulmate became overwhelmed, they returned emotionally to what was familiar. Old memories became comforting. The past became a shelter. Yet after meeting you, every attempt to retreat into the past seemed to remind them why they had outgrown it. And that is what the ex noticed. Your soulmate could remember them without wanting them back. They could acknowledge what had once existed without imagining another beginning. But when your soulmate thought about you, their mind moved forward. That difference was impossible to ignore. The ex eventually asked someone close to your soulmate what had changed. At first, the answer was vague. They met someone. The ex pretended the words did not matter. They asked casually who this person was. Your name entered the conversation. And there was a pause. Because the person speaking already knew something unusual had happened. Your soulmate had mentioned you before. Not repeatedly. Not obsessively. Just differently. There was a softness in their voice when they spoke about you, followed almost immediately by an attempt to hide it. That combination revealed more than a confession ever could. Your soulmate would say something meaningful about you, then quickly minimize it. They might say, "It's complicated." Or, "I don't know what this is." Or, "I'm probably thinking too much." But the person listening understood. People rarely work that hard to dismiss feelings that do not exist. Your soulmate was afraid of what their own heart was showing them. And eventually, the ex understood that too. This is why they did not want you to see the full picture. Not because there was some grand conspiracy against you, but because your understanding would remove one of the greatest advantages the past still possessed: your uncertainty. As long as you doubted your importance, you might remain emotionally exhausted. You might interpret every delay as proof you were unwanted. You might compare yourself to someone you were never supposed to compete with. You might begin changing yourself in an attempt to become easier to choose. But beloved, hear this carefully: you were never meant to become someone else to earn a place in another person's future. Love that requires you to erase yourself is not the destination. And your soulmate is beginning to understand that their responsibility is not merely to feel something for you. Their responsibility is to decide what they are willing to do with those feelings. Because feelings hidden forever eventually become another form of silence. And silence has already cost both of you enough. There was a moment recently when your soulmate realized this. They were alone again. Their phone was nearby. Your name was there. Perhaps in a conversation. Perhaps in a photograph. Perhaps somewhere connected to a memory. Their hand moved toward the screen. Then stopped. They wanted to reach out. They almost did. But that old fear returned. What if I say too much? What if they no longer feel the same? What if I waited too long? What if I open this door and discover they have already learned to live without me? That last question stayed with them. Because your soulmate had spent so much time fearing that you would hurt them that they had never seriously considered another possibility. They might lose you through hesitation. Not betrayal. Not another person. Not destiny. Hesitation. And suddenly the situation looked completely different. They began remembering all the times you had offered an opening. The moments when you had shown patience. The moments when your energy quietly said, "You can be honest with me." The moments when they nearly stepped forward and then retreated. For the first time, your soulmate wondered how those moments had felt from your side. That realization brought remorse. Not the kind meant to drown them in guilt. The kind that creates responsibility. They began understanding that fear may explain their behavior, but it cannot indefinitely justify it. This was the beginning of maturity. And heaven has been working through that maturity, not forcing an outcome, but illuminating choices. Because divine guidance does not erase free will. It reveals the road. The person still has to walk. Your soulmate now sees two roads. One road is familiar. It asks nothing new of them. Stay guarded. Stay uncertain. Keep imagining every possible ending. Keep using old pain as evidence that new love cannot be trusted. Keep waiting for absolute certainty before risking vulnerability. They know that road. They have walked it for years. The other road terrifies them. It requires honesty. It requires admitting that they care. It requires accepting that love always carries some uncertainty because another human heart can never be controlled. It requires showing you who they really are without knowing exactly how you will respond. And beloved, something extraordinary has begun happening. For the first time, the second road feels more frightening but more beautiful. Your soulmate is tired of living according to fear. The ex recognized this during their last conversation. Your soulmate's tone had changed. There was no desperate need to defend you. No argument. No performance. Only certainty about one thing: they were done allowing the past to define what they were capable of receiving. That is when the ex finally asked the question they had been holding back. Do you love them? Your soulmate froze. Not because the answer was impossible. Because the answer came too quickly. Their mind knew before their mouth was ready. And the ex saw it. Your soulmate looked away. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then your soulmate gave an answer that surprised both of them. They said, "I don't know what to call it yet." The ex almost relaxed. Almost. But your soulmate continued. They said, "I only know that when I imagine never speaking to them again, something in me knows I would regret it." That sentence changed the atmosphere. Because regret had always belonged to the past. Now your soulmate was afraid of creating regret in the future. The ex understood exactly what that meant. They understood that your soulmate was no longer deciding between two people. They were deciding between two versions of themselves. The person they had been. And the person they were becoming. You were connected to the second. That was the truth the ex did not want you to understand. But there was still another truth. The one behind those 5 words. They still don't know why. Why what? Why your soulmate had reacted to you so intensely from the beginning. Why they became distant after moments of closeness. Why the ex became curious about you before you ever understood their involvement. And most importantly, why someone close to your soulmate had recognized your significance almost immediately. The explanation came from an old conversation. Years earlier, long before you appeared, your soulmate had made a strange promise to themselves. After everything they had experienced, they said that if they ever met someone who made them feel emotionally safe without making them feel emotionally numb, they would pay attention. They had spent years believing that peace meant boredom and passion meant chaos. They wanted both peace and depth. They did not believe such a combination existed. Until you. And someone close to them remembered that old promise. When your soulmate first began talking about you, that person noticed the similarities. They asked your soulmate, "Do you remember what you said years ago?" Your soulmate knew immediately. They refused to discuss it. They changed the subject. But their reaction revealed the answer. The ex eventually learned about that conversation. That is how they knew. That is what they hoped you would never discover. You had unknowingly matched an emotional prayer your soulmate had carried long before meeting you. Not because destiny had removed their choices. Not because you were obligated to belong together. But because your presence confronted them with something they once claimed they wanted. And now they had to decide whether they possessed the courage to receive it. Beloved, there is something deeply important here for you too. Do not turn this revelation into a reason to wait forever. Your life is sacred too. Your future does not exist merely as a waiting room for another person's healing. You can love someone and still honor yourself. You can understand their fear without making their fear your permanent home. You can leave the door of compassion unlocked without standing beside it every hour wondering when someone will walk through. This message is not asking you to chase. It is asking you to see clearly. Because clarity changes how you carry uncertainty. You no longer need to interpret another person's wounds as evidence of your lack of worth. And your soulmate is being confronted with the same lesson from the opposite direction. They can no longer interpret your independence as evidence that you do not care. Something has been healing on both sides. Quietly. Slowly. And recently, your soulmate experienced a moment that pushed everything closer to the surface. They heard something about you. Nothing terrible. Nothing dangerous. Something surprisingly ordinary. They heard that you seemed to be moving forward. Perhaps becoming more focused. Perhaps more peaceful. Perhaps simply less emotionally available to the confusion that once consumed you. And instead of feeling relieved that the pressure had disappeared, your soulmate felt something completely unexpected. Panic. Not possessiveness. Awareness. The sudden realization that your life had continued while they were deciding whether to participate in it. That night, your soulmate looked at your name again. This time, their hand did not immediately move away. They began writing something. A message. They typed several words. Deleted them. Started again. Deleted that version too. Then they wrote something longer. Something more honest. For several minutes, the message remained on the screen. Their thumb hovered over the button. They could have sent it. They almost did. But before they could, another message appeared on their phone. From the ex. The timing was so unexpected that your soulmate stared at the screen. The message contained no dramatic confession. Just a request. Can we talk one last time? Your soulmate felt the old emotional pattern attempting to return. The timing. The guilt. The feeling of responsibility. For a moment, the message they had written to you disappeared behind the notification from their past. And there it was. The choice in physical form. Past and future on the same screen. Your soulmate sat completely still. This moment was different from every previous moment because now they recognized the pattern while it was happening. Before, they would have reacted automatically. This time they observed it. They noticed the guilt rising. They noticed the instinct to abandon their own emotional needs. They noticed the fear that ignoring the past would make them a bad person. And then they asked themselves one question. If I answer because I genuinely want closure, that is one thing. But if I answer because I am afraid of disappointing someone, haven't I learned anything? That question changed the decision. Your soulmate did answer. But not immediately. And not in the old way. They said they would speak, but only if the conversation was about closure. No revisiting old promises. No emotional bargaining. No blaming. No pretending the future could be rebuilt from memories. The ex agreed. At least initially. The conversation began calmly. Your soulmate listened. The ex admitted things they had never admitted before. They acknowledged that fear had influenced their behavior. They acknowledged that seeing your soulmate move forward had been painful. And then, unexpectedly, they said something about you. They admitted they had been unfair. Your soulmate was stunned. Because this was not the conversation they expected. The ex confessed that much of their resistance toward you had little to do with who you actually were. They barely knew you. Their feelings came from what your presence represented. Finality. If your soulmate genuinely loved again, then the old relationship would no longer exist even as an imaginary possibility. The ex had been holding on to that possibility. And admitting this finally brought the hidden dynamic into the light. Your soulmate did not respond with anger. They understood. Perhaps too well. Because they had also been holding on to things that were already over. Not because they wanted them back. Because accepting finality can be painful. Then the ex said something even more surprising. They said, I think you need to tell them. Your soulmate asked, tell them what? There was another silence. The ex knew the answer. They said, why you really disappeared. And beloved, this is where everything changes. Because until now, you may have believed your soulmate pulled away simply because they were afraid of their feelings. That was part of it. But not all of it. There was a specific event. A specific moment. Something happened just before one of the biggest periods of distance between you. Your soulmate received information about you. They believed it. And it changed how they behaved. The information did not come directly from the ex. That is important. For a long time, your soulmate assumed it had. But recently they discovered the truth. Someone else had spoken. Someone neither you nor your soulmate originally suspected. They told your soulmate that getting closer to you would eventually hurt you. Not hurt them. You. They suggested that your soulmate was too emotionally damaged, too confused, too unfinished to offer you anything stable. And because this matched your soulmate's deepest insecurity, they believed it. They convinced themselves that leaving was an act of protection. They thought distance would spare you from becoming attached to someone who could not yet trust themselves. So when you saw silence, they saw sacrifice. When you saw rejection, they told themselves they were protecting you. But they never asked what you wanted. And that is the mistake they finally understand. You cannot protect someone by making their choices for them. You cannot call silence kindness when honesty was possible. Your soulmate sees that now. The ex knew about this. They had learned the story afterward. And although they had once benefited from the distance it created, they now admitted something your soulmate never expected. You were wrong to disappear. Your soulmate said nothing. The ex continued. You should have told them the truth. Those words struck somewhere deep. Because they came from the last person your soulmate expected to say them. The person they thought would always prefer you remained outside the story was now telling them to stop hiding. Why? Because something had changed in the ex too. They had finally realized that holding onto someone who was emotionally moving forward was hurting everyone involved, including themselves. Closure had begun becoming real. Not theatrical. Not perfect. But real. And then the ex revealed the identity of the person who had planted that fear in your soulmate's mind. Your soulmate could barely believe it. Because it was someone they trusted. Someone who had acted supportive. Someone who had repeatedly encouraged them to take things slowly with you. And when your soulmate asked why this person would interfere, the ex revealed something they had learned only recently. The person was not trying to destroy your connection. Their reason was more complicated. They genuinely believed your soulmate was not ready for you. But they also knew something about your feelings that your soulmate did not. Something you had apparently revealed indirectly, perhaps without realizing how clearly it showed. This person knew you cared more deeply than your soulmate believed. They saw it. And they became afraid that your soulmate would mishandle something genuine. So instead of encouraging honesty, they encouraged distance. They thought they were preventing heartbreak. Instead, they created it. Your soulmate suddenly understood the entire chain. One person's fear triggered another person's insecurity. That insecurity created silence. The silence created misunderstanding. The misunderstanding created more distance. And somewhere in the middle stood two people who never actually had the conversation that could have changed everything. Your soulmate felt overwhelmed. Because for the first time, they could see how much of the story had been built around assumptions. They assumed you would be better without them. You may have assumed they did not care. The ex assumed your connection would fade. Someone else assumed distance would protect you. Everyone had assumptions. But very little truth had been spoken directly. And that is what your soulmate now wants to change. After the conversation with the ex ended, they returned to the message they had been writing to you. It was still there. Unsent. They read it again. But now the words felt incomplete. Because after everything they had just learned, "I miss you" was no longer enough. They deleted the message. Not because they had changed their mind. Because they realized that if they finally spoke, they needed to tell you the whole truth. They began writing again. This time they started with an apology. Then they explained why they had disappeared. They wrote about the fear. The advice they had believed. The old wound that convinced them they were dangerous to anyone who loved them. They admitted that deciding what was best for you, without asking you, had been unfair. Then they wrote something they had never dared put into words before. They admitted what they felt the first time they realized you mattered. And beloved, that sentence stopped even your soulmate. They stared at it. Read it again. Their eyes filled with emotion. Because seeing the truth written plainly made it impossible to hide behind confusion anymore. The sentence said that meeting you had not made them afraid of love. Meeting you had made them afraid of losing something real. For years they thought those were the same fear. Now they knew they were not. They kept writing. The message became longer. More vulnerable. more honest than anything they had ever sent you. But before they finished, something happened. Their phone rang. It was the person who had originally warned them to stay away from you. The person whose advice had helped create the distance. Your soulmate almost ignored the call. Then something inside them said to answer. They did. The voice on the other side sounded different. Nervous. Almost ashamed. They said, "There's something else I never told you." Your soulmate immediately became still. What? The person hesitated. Then said something that made your soulmate look directly at the unfinished message to you. They revealed that after warning your soulmate to keep their distance, they had eventually spoken with you too. Not necessarily in an obvious conversation about your soulmate. But there had been an interaction. A moment. And something you said during that interaction changed their opinion completely. Your soulmate asked what you had said. The person took a breath. Then began repeating your words. But before they finished, your soulmate interrupted. Because they recognized the sentence. You had said those exact words to your soulmate once. A sentence they had never forgotten. And suddenly your soulmate realized that what they had believed was a private moment between you had somehow become the key to understanding why this person later regretted telling them to walk away. Your soulmate asked one final question. When did they say this? The answer made their heart drop. Because it happened on the exact day your soulmate decided to disappear. Which meant that while your soulmate was convincing themselves they were leaving to protect you, you had already said something that would have changed their decision completely. They simply never heard it. And now, for the first time, your soulmate is about to discover exactly what you said that day, and why the person who heard it has carried the guilt of keeping it from them ever since.